I'm a police officer that quit his job after a paranormal experience. I'm not a superstitious person. I didn't believe in ghosts or demons until now. Yeah, stuff happens that can't be explained. Uh, but I just want you all to know that it took more than a couple of flying spoons or a door opening on its own to scare me out of my job, since the department didn't find any reason to keep this police report confidential. I will now detail you everything I can on what happened on the scariest night of my life. We had just received word from dispatch to check out a noise complaint in a small neighborhood whose name I will not disclose for their privacy. It was me and my partner. Let's call him Paul, and I'll go by Mike. We arrived sometime after midnight. The street is dead. Everyone is sound, asleep at this point. We park our patrol car in front of the aforementioned house and exit the vehicle. We knock on the door and let our presence known. Police. Is anyone home? A little girl, 8, 10 in appearance, opens the door and peeks through the gap. Hey, I crouch to make myself less intimidating. Is your parent or guardian home? She shakes her head. My first thought was that she probably had the TV a little too high and woke up the neighbors. But before I could tell her to stay inside and lock the doors, then I heard the sound of crashing silverware coming from what I presumed would be the kitchen. The entire house was nearly pitch black. The girl answering the door and shaking her head let me know she was alone, which makes whoever made that noise an intruder as far as it concerns me. I asked the girl to step outside and turn to Paul. Paul, why don't you give her one of those lollipops you like to suck on when you're nervous? Paul gave me a cold stare as the girl giggled. They went to go wait by the car as I slowly pushed the door all the way open. Police. If there is anyone in this house, please let yourself be known. Without a warrant, I had no right to enter the building. I tried my best to spot whoever made the noise, but it is too dark to see just any sign of a threat, and I would be justified to search the house. But nothing. I left the door open and headed back towards Paul and the girl. Hey again. I don't think we introduced ourselves. I'm Officer Mike. This is my partner, Paul. If I may ask, what is your name? Maribel. That's a pretty name. So, Maribel, again, if I may ask. Where is your family? As soon as I had finished my sentence, the television in the living room turned on, volume fully up. Me and Paul quickly turned in surprise and could see the television playing static from outside. We put Maribel in the backseat of the patrol car for her safety, as no civilians were allowed in the front seats. We then, against our better judgment, enter the house. We tried every switch in the house, but no lights came on. While wandering the house cautiously, I would catch a person standing in the mirrors. I thought it was Paul, but every time I looked behind me, Paul was nowhere to be found. As I returned to the front door along with Paul, we both jumped as running footsteps echoed down the hall. We detached our firearms and aimed it at the source. The footsteps got louder and got closer, but no one ever appeared physically. Lamps, chairs, and other stuff started getting thrown around by an invisible force as the footsteps reached us. We sprinted out of the house and waited by the front yard. The footsteps seemed to stop, followed by the police siren that went off. I ran to the car and silenced the siren. I looked back at Paul, who seemed shook. You all right, Paul? He takes a lollipop out of its package and puts it in his mouth. Yep. I opened the rear door and checked up on Maribel. You okay? She nodded her head, so I walked back to Paul. I don't know what to make of this, he said. Yeah, me neither. No, seriously. Ignore the running invisible man that knocked everything down for a second. All the family photos, pictures on the wall. He points at Maribel. She's not in any of them. So, what are you thinking? The footsteps led outside. Then the siren goes off. There's a million buttons in that car. What are the chances? Paul, are you trying to tell me that Maribel's haunted? How do you explain what we just saw? I'm sure there's an explanation. The TV turns on when we take Maribel outside, prompting us to check it out. Someone or something shows up in the mirrors, but ducks away. I remember wanting to shut him up, not because he wasn't making any sense, but because he was. I know you've seen it. It was prowling around. Then it runs outside and gets in the car, tries all the buttons. I think a ghost is trying to get to the girl. I just stood there, not sure what to say. Until Paul decided to start walking back towards the house. Paul, what are you doing? It only shows up in the mirrors. That's how we find it. I followed him inside and watched as he takes a book from the counter and breaks the nearest mirror. What's the matter with you? That's someone's property. He takes a shard and hands another to me. It's not every day you get to arrest a ghost. We aimed our flashlights all over the house, waiting for something to appear in the broken glass. I recall praying to God Almighty to not let anything show up, but it did. I panicked as it swung its red, bony arm at my back. It ripped right through my uniform, causing me to fall forward. I dropped the glass, which broke into smaller chunks. It continued clawing at my shirt and flesh, but stopped when Paul opened fire. I heard its screech fading as Paul helped me up. We both then hurried back outside to find Maribel missing from the back seat. It was difficult explaining what happened to the department without sounding like nut jobs. The police cameras who we were betting on to prove our stories had shut off the moment we entered the house. The thing, whatever it was, must have turned them off while we were unaware. The only part of our story that our police captain took seriously was the girl. Maribel. The captain brought up a missing person report and asked us if this was the girl we saw. It was. It's been just a few days since I gave up the badge to save whatever little pride I could spare. I just ask to whoever reads this and to whomever it may reach. The next time a door opens on its own or things move by themselves in your home, check the mirrors. Camping story stalker. I'm going to make this as short as possible. Around 2013, me and my friend went hiking up north and planned on staying there for 2 weeks. Left a week early after discovering a stalker's hideout with photos of us sleeping in our tent, eating and showering in a nearby river. We ended up informing the police, who had shut the trail slash camping site down after 2 weeks of investigation. There were hints earlier to finding his hideout, as in seeing a flash go off in the river and waking up in the middle of the night to a shadow outside in the shape of a human. Most terrifying experience of our lives, and we'll never forget it. Teke Teke, the schoolboy, Keisuke, was a university student who attended one of the highest-ranking universities in Ashiya. Unfortunately, he was not well liked by 3 students who also participated at his university, constantly belittling him for not coming from a high-class family since he had gotten the scholarship to participate in the university he was going to. He was bullied relentlessly. Even when Keisuke reported them, it was swept under the rug because his bully's parents donated money yearly. It was not fair. Keisuke felt trapped. Even if he reported it to the police, would their parents not just silence them with cash as well? Then, one afternoon, while waiting at the station, those 3 bullies were also waiting with Keisuke. His nose was in a book, studying so they would not have his attention. One of them got angry, pushing Keisuke from behind, causing him to fall into the tracks and hit his head. A horn woke him up, but it was too late, and the train could not stop. The 3 bullies ran as people inside the train screamed. Watching them run away, Keisuke swore that he would get revenge on them. No matter how long it took, he would find them. He would wait patiently until all 3 of them were gone. He closed his eyes as he felt himself slowly drifting off into darkness. Iori arrived in Ashiya just as sunset. He stepped out of the taxi with a bag in his hand. The apostolic nunciature had called him here to investigate a strange curse, causing quite a rise among the locals. Thanking the driver, he shut the door and began his walk up the stairs to the church. Upon reaching the door, Deacon Chihiro opened it, nodding to Iori and stepping aside. "Come in. We have much to do," Chihiro mumbles. Iori nodded and walked inside, watching over his shoulder as the door closed behind him. The deacon caught up with him, walking at his side and leading him into an office. Chihiro motioned to a chair as he sat behind his desk. "I am not the monster. The first person I killed was by accident. No, truly, I didn't mean to end his life, but only to hurt him as much as he had hurt me. Ashton was a bully to the 10th degree, and while he definitely deserved the death he received, It was not my intention. The ex of my lover who still lived with her. The ex of my lover who would abuse her. The ex of my lover who did deserve death. He confronted me in the hallway of Tiffany's while she was away. He blocked my exit and charged at me, so if anything, it was self-defense. It would absolutely hold up in court. The judge would clearly see my side of the story and agree. I only meant to knock him unconscious, but I couldn't stop. The way his skull smashed into the knob felt so good every time I thrusted it. The softening of his cranial dent from each time it was forced, the blood on my hands, the small splatters on my face. I must admit, it felt euphoric. No more can this cretinous monster affect others' lives. His vileness smothered out like a light. Gone. The world was better off than it was 5 minutes before, while he was stealing the oxygen from others more deserving. But I was clearly an amateur then. I left the body. And Tiffany found it. Oh, how I'm sure she screamed. I can only imagine the horror she must have felt as he laid twitching by his bedroom door in his pile of blood. I wish I could have seen it. I wish I could have been there to comfort her, to explain to her why it was for the best, why she was now free from his oppression and torment he forced onto her daily life. But sadly, I could not. I had to flee. The police wouldn't understand in that moment. They never could. Worthless pigs. My second kill was much more prepared and professional, as it was one I had planned for a majority of my life. Sheila was my 5th grade teacher, and her demise was her own doing. As a young boy who had just moved across the country for a 3rd time, I was already fighting an uphill battle, but Sheila made my 5th year a war. She regularly encouraged the other children to bully me. She made me a target, not just for her, but for my classmates. And I will always remember the day when she stood up to ask the class why I hadn't finished my homework the night before. Because he's lazy, one girl said. Because he was probably watching TV instead, said another. I was always told that teachers went into the profession to make a difference in their students' lives, but foolish me thought it was for the better. Sheila went into the profession to make children's lives like mine worse. This is the instance in my life where I changed from a happy child to a sinister one. It is her fault for why I am the way I am. 30 years of planning. And I finally got the last laugh. She was already old, well past her late 40s when I had her as a teacher. Now she is frail. I spent a good time studying her and her habits. Her living alone, as I assume her husband had passed, and her grown children no longer lived with her. First time I saw her in decades was when she was walking out to her car. She had gray hair now. And she walked much slower, but she still carried that smugness around her. The "I'm better than you" attitude. And it was confirmed when I ran into her at the market. She was reaching for a jar on a higher shelf, and me, being the kind person that I am, reached for it and gave it to her. Bitch had the audacity to say, if I needed help, I would have asked. Thank you, Sheila, for giving me the confirmation that you are still the person you were when I was young. I was following her for several weeks in an RV I had purchased in cash to escape any sort of trail. I was able to camp down the street at a truck stop, and luckily, it was not that far from her home. She went to church 2 times a week, ironic, and would go to evening worship on Wednesdays. This is when I decided to perform. I waited until dark, and she pulled out of the driveway before I hopped her fence into her backyard. Luckily, the back door from the patio was unlocked. If you only saw the house without meeting the woman, you would think she was a kind person. Lovely pictures of her adult children and what I could assume were her grandchildren on the walls. An older photograph of her, young, in a wedding gown, dancing with who I could assume was her groom. But I would not be fooled by this facade of kindness. If anything, it made me more furious. How can someone so vile deserve such things in life? I hid in her coat closet facing the living room where her television was, having the wire I purchased out of state wrapped around my leather gloves. I wear shoe covers, which make me quieter while hiding the soles to leave no evidence. She then comes in. I wait. She takes her time getting settled for the evening before she sits down in a recliner facing the television in the living room, and I can see her easily through the door crack. I wait. Um, and I wait. She begins to doze off a bit, and this is when I find it to be the perfect time. I slid out of the closet and do my best to not let it move much to avoid any noise. I carefully creep behind her, and luckily for me, she is too far gone to notice. I wait until a commercial break, as I do not want to interrupt her show. I'm not that cruel. Not as cruel as her. And it was an Alzheimer's medication that came on. I remember it vividly. This is when I wrapped the wire around her throat and tightened. The noises she made, the kicks she kicked, the gasping for air. It was what I had dreamt my entire life. The rush of the high, of finally relinquishing the world of a demon. I had so much joy I couldn't help but smile. Until she looked up at me. I could see her eyes turning red from the blood vessels bursting, her face turned blue. And for a second I eased my grip. A part of me felt sorry for the old woman until I thought of all that she did to me. The anger then took over, and I wrapped even tighter than before. I kept asking her if she remembered me, if she remembered who I was, and if she knew why I was doing this. I'm sure 100 different past students she tortured in her life ran through her mind. It didn't matter if she knew who I was. All that mattered is she was gone. She was feeling all the pain she has caused, and she was finally paying for her sins, and her absolvement was complete when her legs quit kicking. It was like a weight off my shoulders. This evil person was gone. Gone, and never to be seen again. I stood there with happiness in my face, knowing I had done the right thing. But it was ended shortly when I heard a car pull into the driveway outside of the house. I left in a hurry. Sprinted as fast as I could out of the house, slamming the back door and over the same fence I climbed before. I was only a few blocks away when I heard the screams. Whose screams they were, I do not know. But how I wish I could have been there to comfort them. To tell them what had happened was righteous and was done out of necessity for the safety of children she would teach in the future. I would tell them all of the horrible things she had done to me and to other children, and they would understand. They would understand that what laid in that living room was not a person, but a monster.